before.
How were you perceived by the Italians?
It's quite funny. I was the Italo-Scot. At the beginning, I was always classified as the Italo-Scot. By the time I left, because my Italian turned out to be so good, I was accepted as Italian. I became quite fluent in Italian. Even now, if I go over to Italy for any length of time, well, it takes me a week or two to get back into the swing of things, because I actually managed to think in Italian. I don't actually think in English when I speak Italian, but initially sometimes I'm juggling words and I have to, so it takes me that week or so to get past that stage, and when I can pass that stage I start thinking in Italian.
Did you always present yourself, yes, as a Scot, but I have Italian background?
I've always presented myself as being both. I actually have a Scottish Italian tartan kilt, which I had made for myself. So my blood is pure Italian, but I have been brought up here, so I classify myself, my mother tongue is English. So therefore, I would classify myself as, I think it's 57. I'm not really one or the other, 100%. I do have the advantage that I can go here, I can live here, and I can live over there and feel comfortable in both. And I can adapt to both very quickly. I don't feel uncomfortable in Italy, and I don't feel uncomfortable here. And I think that's the biggest point of understanding where I come from.
Were there major changes going on in Italian society when you were over there?
Yes, politically in particular. When I was over there, the communists were very big, to the extent that they almost had power, and it was them that refused to take it. Ever since the Second World War, apart from this ultimate period just gone past there with Berlusconi, Italy's always had coalition governments. And the great thing about a coalition government is that you can always blame somebody else. And that's the case that I've always been educated with. The Christian Democrats, the Socialists, the Communists, the Movimento Sociale, which is the Fascists, or the equivalent of the Fascists, they all have different agendas. They always agree to disagree, and they can fight about it, and they can blame each other. Because Italy as a country, technically speaking, is bankrupt. But as a country, personally, there are very wealthy people in Italy, because they still are one of the very few countries in Europe that produce a lot and they export a lot. But the country itself, it's like all countries in Europe, in the Western world, we are bogged down with being unrealistic in many areas. Pensions is a big one. Italy, 50, 55. People want to retire. Where are the money going to come from? This country here, we have our social services, our NHS. People don't want to pay taxes, but they don't realise that if you don't pay taxes, you can't subsidise all these. But, like all systems in Italy and all systems in Britain, these systems get abused. And it's not the real cases, or the genuine cases, that are suffering, that are benefiting. It's the fraudulent ones that are getting away with it that are making the genuine cases suffer. And it's as bad in Italy as it is here. The only thing is we don't have a social services like we have here, but we have pensions. We have, especially in southern Italy, a major black economy, which is horrific. The Naples black economy alone could probably pay off Italy's debt. But of course nobody does anything about it because it suits everybody not to do anything about it in Italy. We don't have that in this country, but you grow to expect anything and everything in Italy. You're never surprised that from one day to the next a law comes in you never even heard existed. Whereas here it has to go through various bodies, and nothing happens overnight here. Whereas in Italy it can do, and it's expected and accepted. It does happen.
So did you have political affiliations when you stayed there?
No. I have always adopted my father's politics, and he always believed that politics was the cancer of all economies, or any economy, because politics devoids you of common sense, and it devoids you of rational thinking. A politician will be the only person that tells you need politics to govern, which is true, because it's a politician that governs. But a politician is dictated to by political views. So a decision that needs to be made on whether something's right or wrong can be tainted by a political view. Oh, we can't do that because we're right wing, or we can't do that because we're left wing. And he said, you can't govern and you can't you don't live your life that way, so how can you expect to govern? And he was perfectly correct. And I think Italy, of all countries, was probably the biggest enlightened me to seeing how things shouldn't go, because every time something happened it was a political argument. When I was studying in Italy, I took up conversational English to earn money. I was doing classes, and I always remember a lot in Italy, the students, the youngsters, are very, let's put it this way, politically aware. And in 1 hour's conversational class, for one view I was called a communist, and for another view I was called a fascist. And I actually asked the kids I was speaking to, who were kind of 18-year-olds, I said to them, in this conversational class of 1 hour, you've managed to classify me a communist for having this view and a fascist for having this view. Who are you looking at? And they said, what do you mean? I said, am I one person? Yes. Am I not allowed to have that view or this view without being tainted that I have political underlying tones in it? To me, that's common sense for this, it's common sense for that. But the fascists are calling me this for having that view, and the communists are calling me that for having that view. And I'm only judging something by my opinion and by what I see and feel. So I got no reaction. They looked at me as if I had horns, because they couldn't answer me. They had not clicked that. I think now a lot of people have clicked to this, that you can have views but not be coloured with it. It's like saying if you're a Celtic supporter you're a Catholic, and Rangers you're a Protestant. Now you've got Celtic and Rangers supporters that are at both. But in those days, in the very early days, you couldn't be, you had to be Catholic, or you had to be, like I had to be a Celtic supporter because I was Italian. How do you work this one out? Because being Italian you must be Catholic, so therefore you must support Celtic. It doesn't work that way now. It's changed. And I think the same with political views. It's like local politics here. I have become, I'll support any politician, and I literally mean any politician who gives me the impression that what they want to do and what they feel is correct. But I won't back somebody who gives me the impression he's driven purely by the political views. For instance, I support one of the local councillors in here because he's an independent. Now I do know that he doesn't have any political affiliations. I also know that every decision he makes, he judges on the rationalisation of what's in front of him, not what a politician or a party is saying he should go for, because that's the view of the party. So that's me. I'm very simplistic that way, much to the annoyance of a lot of people, but anyway.
But did you feel comfortable enough in Italy that you thought you might spend the rest of your life there?
Not the rest of my life. I'm very happy being able to spend both, let's say, sharing myself with both. And I'm very fortunate that my partner Anne, she's of the same view, and my children are, albeit that they don't have a grasp of the Italian language, but are quite happy to be able to bounce back and forward from Italy, like me. And I put that down as part of an education as well.
Did you say you'd been married before?
Twice.
Right. When was the first?
God, I can't remember. That was at least 22 years ago, 23 years ago. And the next one was about 17, 18 years ago. 19 years ago, sorry.
To people from Scotland?
Yes, first one was one of these issues. Second one was, so this time I've got a partner who I've been with longer than both my marriages together, and I love her to bits, but my fear of getting married again overrules me wanting to get married. I feel that it's not worked twice before, I'm not going to risk it a third time.
When you were in Italy for this long period, how was the cafe doing back here?
Well, in those days my mother and father were still alive. It was waning, but it was still working. But the advent of holidays abroad and people going away stopped Gourock becoming a resort anymore. Then in '72 we became part of Inverclyde, so Gourock then became a backwater. Because of a means testing system, Gourock was always classified as an area that never needed, so therefore it never got. And in that whole approach was denied a lot of things over the years. So you tended to find that Gourock became a serious backwater. And when I came back in 1981, 82, my father was a fair age, and I came home purposely because I was an only child. My parents were getting older. My father wouldn't retire, my mother wouldn't retire. So I, at that point there, couldn't make my permanent life in Italy.
Was there any crisis point, or
No,
was it a decision over a period of...
It was a decision. It took me a year to come to a conclusion. I came back forward on certain holidays and I was assessing the situation. There was also an issue where I had a business opportunity in Italy which appeared, and had I taken it, I would not have been able to come back and forward as easy as I was going to be. And should something have happened to my parents, I would have found it difficult to deal with it. So I had to take that into consideration as well, and it was that made me decide to come home. Nothing else. It's on, yeah. Sorry. So it was all that was, put together and added into the situation. Nobody forced me. My parents didn't want me to come back. I mean, I wasn't under any duress. It was me. And then, unfortunately, 2 or 3 years after I came back, my father passed away. And it was then that when I inherited the cafe, I decided that the cafe as it was couldn't survive any longer. And we had to go through a metamorphosis, we had to go through a change. And it was at that point that my feeling of what happened and what I had experienced in Italy, of what cafes were like over there, I felt could and should be adapted to Britain.
So did you immediately come back to work
Yes.
in the cafe?
Yes, yeah. I came back to help my father. Bit of a difference from having a kind of regular job to coming in to doing it. It was quite good. I mean, I enjoyed it because, to a point, it was open from 10 till 10 at night. Luckily enough, having my father around meant that I was okay as far as cover went. If I needed to go out or do, it was always my father. My mother did it to a point, but she was a certain age as well. So it was at that point I decided I had to do something drastic, and bit the bullet and changed the cafe into what it is now. Albeit we tried to keep it still a cafe. In those days it was called the Continental Cafe, and when I changed it in 1985, I stupidly, kind of playing with words, wanted it to change without being changed. So I thought, well, instead of calling it Continental Cafe, we'll call it Cafe Continental. It's a change without a change. And funnily enough, it actually worked, because people could still identify it with it as a continental. Some as a cafe and some as continental cafe. But they realised that it took a while, it took 3 or 4 years for people to understand you could come for a coffee and still have a pint of lager and not be in a different place, not be in a pub for a pint and not be in a cafe for a coffee, but mix the two. Then we developed it a bit more to offer food and ice cream and things. So it is a bit of a chameleon. It does change as the day goes on. It starts off as a coffee shop and finishes up as a pub or a discotheque at night.
It must have been quite innovative for that time.
It was also very difficult to make people understand. I'll never forget one councillor who, when I was applying for a licence, and we asked for a public house licence, because public house is a very unfortunate term, but that was a type of licence which could only function. Now, he was perfectly correct. In those days, if you had a public house licence, you were a pub. But what this chap actually forgot, public house licence was a type of licence, not necessarily, but albeit it was, not necessarily depicting a pub. So to make the cafe function properly, we needed a public house licence. We were never going to be a pub. The planning permission for here was given for a brasserie oblique licensed cafe. The type of license we have is public house, but we are a brasserie licensed cafe. But this councillor got a fixation that because we had a public house licence, quote, you can't con me, if you've got a public house licence, you're a pub. So there are some people you can educate to a point, but if you didn't want to accept it, you can't change it. You can't change their view. That's indoctrinated into them.
When you come back in the sort of early mid-80s, what changes did you see about the place, about the area?
It became more depressing. It lost its sparkle. Every summer and spring, the streets would be absolutely heaving. They've died. I mean, in the height of summer, you think you were in autumn. The boating station had gone, the paddling ponds had disappeared, the swimming pool was there but only just. The ferries that used to come in and out of the pier had all but gone. The station had fallen into disrepair. The Bay Hotel was falling apart. Lots of things had happened. There was serious neglect, and the neglect had gone on for so long that it got to a stage where people were not investing in this area, because especially this side of the street, because in those days compulsory purchase orders notices had been issued to all the properties on this side of the street. So nobody was ever going to do any work to maintain the properties because of that. And these compulsory purchase notices were only lifted in 1979, and that had been in place since 1960 odd. So you can understand that in those days, under the old Gourock Borough, they wanted to make a big promenade here, a walkway through, and this, that, and next thing. But the shopkeepers on the other side objected, because they knew that if you did that, the shops would be exposed to all the elements, and they would no longer be viable for people to shop. So they rebelled. Eventually the council agreed that it wasn't sensible to demolish this side. And apart from that, holiday resorts, as Gourock once knew, didn't exist. So it was better to keep it as was and keep the status quo. And to encourage people to reinvest, they removed the compulsory purchase and they gave people grants to do the properties up. Hence the reason we did all the windows at the back and everything in here. But it was quite tragic, given what Gourock had, the history that Gourock had, to see the way it was reduced. Hence the reason I wanted to change it for this. I was always hoping that changing cafe would have been a catalyst to let other things happen. I didn't bank on the resistance that would have come from Inverclyde to let anything happen in Gourock, be it public spending or private spending. And right up to this day, there is an underlying wish to not let anything or much happen in Gourock. Whereas if you go to Greenock or Port Glasgow, you can stand your head, they'll let you do it. Whereas here, if you think you're looking the wrong way, they won't let you do it.
So when did this area change from being residential into the offices? Was your parents still living here?
We lived in here right up till I think my parents lived here right until 1972. 72, yes. Because by that time we bought a flat next door. The property next door, we bought the flat next door. So we lived between there and here right up until 80. And then I did a property up with my father in Greenock, down the towns, down in the main road, and we moved into one of them there. And my father had bought the house that I'm living in just now way back in '64. So I'm still working on it. He started it, I'm still working on it. So it's a labour of love. It's a very old house, but it's one of those ones that, because it's its age, it's always needed a lot of work done, but it's continuity, you have to keep doing it, you know, you don't stop, unfortunately.
Can I ask about his funeral? Are there marked differences between an Italian funeral and a Scottish funeral?
Not really. The only difference is that my father is interred in Italy, and it's in a catacomb in the village, and it's on the wall. Whereas here, in those days, before cremation was any particular big issue, you were buried in the ground. But the church service is identical, absolutely identical. You in Italy, it's very, I mean, there's more, the only one thing I would say, there's more respect. In fact, there is loads of respect for cemeteries in Italy compared to here. Here there seems to be a lack of respect. And that was one thing my father always said. And that's what convinced me to bury him in Italy. He felt that the cemeteries were, in fact you can see with the local ones, they push you over headstones. I mean, what does that achieve? Nothing. Whereas over there, people go, even if I'm not there, I know my father's thing is looked after, because somebody next to it will do it. And in saying that, my mother's buried in Musselburgh, and over there it's very well looked after. There's no vandalism or any sort, and people do, but it is slightly out of the town, and it's not in an area where people would walk through. So I mean, it's all in perspective, really.
Whereabouts in Italy is your farm?
La Spezia. It's a village called Castiglione. It's just outside La Spezia. Every village has its own cemetery, and
so is that his origins? Is that
yes, that's the village he came from. The main town is La Spezia, but the village is Castiglione. My mother came from Viverino, which is a village across the river from Castiglione. So they turned out to be very close to each other. Yeah.
Throughout your father's involvement in the business, did the wider Italian community, did that play a part at all in supplies or communications?
Well, right through the war, my father was the instigator of keeping businesses going. Then he was interned, and that kind of waned, but the buildings were, as I said earlier on, were all taken over by the TOC H and the Norwegian Navy. So after the war, when he came back, he re-established a lot of things, and they formed what he called a cooperative in those days, which was all the local Italians in Greenock and Port Glasgow got together, and they formed a buying group. and they called it the Clyde Ice Cream Company, and it was in South Street, and it was the first of the trade markets, or not supermarkets, but kind of wholesalers, for want of a better word. So we bought for ourselves, and every member of the Italian community who was involved at the grassroots, I think it was about 9 of them at the time, all had a share in the business. So for the first 6 or 7 years, any profit we made, it was reinvested. Then after that, there was a dividend given out to the shareholders, but it was always nominal, because everyone within the group preferred to have better prices, and the way they could attain better prices was buying in bulk. So they would buy in bulk and distribute amongst themselves.
And how did that pan out as the years went on?
That panned out very well until, again, the demise of this area as a holiday resort. And my father being the driving force behind it, it was fine, and I helped him right up until he took ill. And then I said, hold on a minute, because some of the other directors started expecting me to do what my father did, and I thought, no, because my father wasn't getting paid for what he was doing, so I actually encouraged others to go and do it. I said, look, no offence, my father's done it for long enough. I helped him. I don't see why I should carry on. I think it's about time that one of you takes the mantle and runs with it. So they did for a while, but then eventually it became not viable to keep it going as it was, so we just wound it up and sold it. Because the cafes, from having something like maybe 180 cafes between Port Glasgow, outlying countries and down the coast, in the last year or two, I think they're lucky if it was about 15. So you can imagine the entity just wasn't worthwhile.
And is there a residual network of Italian families left?
There's a lot of Italian families left, but there's none of them that have formed any form of